The dark roast coffee was still scalding hot when David Hayes poured it into his ceramic mug, the thick steam curling upward in lazy, hypnotic spirals toward the ceiling. Standing by the kitchen window, he quietly watched his wife, Kristen, aggressively load the last piece of her heavy designer luggage into the trunk of her sleek black Mercedes. She had been packing for this exclusive girls' trip to Napa Valley for 3 solid weeks, treating the entire vacation like a highly classified military operation. Over the years, David had learned the hard way not to question her elaborate, obsessive preparations. In the 6 agonizing years since their son Julian's terrible accident, questioning Kristen only ever led to vicious fights that left David sleeping on the cold living room couch. 2 weeks is a really long time, David had mentioned the night before, being incredibly careful to keep his tone flat and neutral. Kristen had merely given him that heavily practiced smile, the chilling one that stretched her lips but never quite reached her cold eyes. "The girls and I desperately need this, David. You have absolutely no idea how exhausting it's been dealing with everything here." Everything here. That was exactly what she called their child now. Not Julian, not our sweet boy, just everything. David took a slow sip of his bitter coffee and glanced up at the ceiling. Julian was still fast asleep upstairs, or at least he was supposed to be. The highly specialized hospital bed Kristen had absolutely insisted on installing had cost an absolute fortune. So had the top-of-the-line motorized wheelchair, the extensive bathroom modifications, and the expensive physical therapy equipment that currently just gathered thick dust in the corner of Julian's bedroom. It sat unused because Kristen had aggressively fired the last 3 physical therapists for not showing enough rapid progress. Outside, the Mercedes engine roared to life with a deep growl. Kristen didn't bother to come back inside to say a proper goodbye. She didn't even roll down the window to wave. Instead, the luxury car reversed down their long driveway with the kind of aggressive, reckless speed that made the expensive tires squeal sharply against the pavement. David stood perfectly still, watching until the vehicle completely disappeared around the sharp corner of their quiet, suburban Seattle cul-de-sac. He remained standing there for a long moment, coffee cup gripped tightly in his hand, feeling the strange, heavy weight of absolute silence settle over the large house. 14 days, just him and Julian. No Kristen hovering menacingly over them with her strict clipboard, her endless rigid schedules, and her countless pills. The pills. Julian was forced to take so many pills. David had genuinely tried to learn what all the medications were for, but Kristen fiercely controlled every single medical decision in the house. She was the only one who spoke privately to the doctors, the only one who filled the heavy prescriptions, and the one who meticulously measured out the colorful doses 3 specific times a day. Then a sound came from directly behind him. Footsteps. Normal, steady, rhythmic footsteps descending the wooden stairs. David's coffee mug slipped from his grasp and shattered into dozens of pieces on the hard kitchen floor, hot liquid splashing everywhere. He spun around, his heart suddenly hammering violently against his ribs, and saw something completely impossible. Julian stood perfectly still at the base of the staircase. He was fully upright, walking directly toward his father with purposeful, confident strides. He wasn't shuffling. He wasn't stumbling. He was walking exactly like he had never stopped. "Dad," Julian's voice was urgent, breathless, and incredibly sharp. At 12 years old, the young boy had his mother's thick dark hair, but he possessed David's piercing gray eyes, eyes that were currently wide with a terrifying mixture of deep intelligence and raw fear that David had never witnessed before. "We need to leave the house right now. Instantly." David couldn't move a single muscle. His brain simply couldn't process the visual information. 6 years. Julian had been trapped in that motorized wheelchair for 6 entire years. The horrific accident at the family lake house when he was only 6 years old. The brutal fall from the wooden dock that the top specialists said had severely damaged his delicate spinal cord beyond any hope of repair. The endless, tear-filled nights of watching his beloved son struggle to do basic tasks. The crushing, suffocating weight of mounting medical bills. the slow, painful death of his marriage under the immense pressure. Julian, how are you doing this? There's absolutely no time. Julian grabbed his father's forearm with a surprising, desperate strength. I swear I'll explain everything to you, but we have to go right this second. She set something up. They are coming for us. Who is coming? What on earth are you talking about? But even as David asked the frantic questions, something dark and freezing cold settled heavily in the pit of his stomach. The bizarre way Kristen had abruptly left. No final goodbye. The aggressive, squealing speed of her departure. The dark finality of it all. Julian was already physically moving toward the attached garage, forcefully pulling David along with him. I've been faking it, Dad. For 4 long years I've been faking being paralyzed. I am so incredibly sorry to lie to you, but I had to. If Mom ever knew I could walk, she would have. His young voice cracked with genuine terror. Please, Dad, just trust me this once. Grab the car keys. We have to leave before. The deafening sound that suddenly cut him off was entirely unmistakable. An engine. A very large, heavy engine, sounding exactly like a commercial truck pulling aggressively into their paved driveway. David's panicked mind raced through all the mundane possibilities. A package delivery. No, there was absolutely no delivery scheduled for today. The neighborhood landscapers. No, they only ever came on Thursday mornings. Peering through the frosted decorative glass of the heavy front door, he could clearly see the dark, imposing outline of a large vehicle. It was a dark-colored utility van. Julian's face went completely white, drained of all blood. They're early to the garage now. Something in his son's sheer, unadulterated terror finally overrode David's stunned paralysis. He frantically snatched his car keys from the brass hook by the front door and sprinted. They burst through the heavy fire door into the dim garage, where David's large Chevy Tahoe sat parked. He fumbled wildly with the plastic key fob, his hands shaking violently as Julian practically vaulted into the passenger seat with an athletic agility that should have been physically impossible for him. The garage door opener. David desperately slammed his palm against the wall button, and the heavy door began its agonizingly slow mechanical rise. Too slow. Everything in the world was happening far too slow. He instantly started the roaring engine, violently threw the large SUV into reverse and peered through the rising gap of the garage door. David could clearly see thick boots, 2 pairs of heavy boots, men's boots, dark, scuffed work boots. Go, 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 Julian shouted at the top of his lungs. David completely stopped thinking and purely reacted. He slammed his right foot down hard on the accelerator. The massive Tahoe shot backward out of the garage with a brutal force that aggressively pressed both of them deep into their leather seats. The 2 unidentified men on the driveway had to jump frantically aside to avoid being crushed. In a split second, David caught a terrifying glimpse of dark tactical clothing, black ski masks pulling over their faces, and something distinctly metallic gleaming in one man's gloved hand. And then they were out in the open street, the heavy tires screaming loudly against the asphalt as David violently yanked the steering wheel to turn. Drive straight toward the old industrial district, Julian commanded, breathing incredibly hard, his chest heaving. Near the abandoned shipping yards. There's a secure storage unit there, number 247. I promise I will thoroughly explain everything once we get there. David's tight knuckles were completely white on the leather steering wheel. He frantically checked the rearview mirror. The dark utility van was rapidly pulling out of their driveway, tires smoking, beginning to aggressively follow them. Julian, you need to tell me exactly what the hell is going on right this second. His son twisted around in the passenger seat, and David saw hot, silent tears streaming rapidly down the young boy's pale face. Mom has been actively trying to violently kill us, Dad, both of us, and I have absolute proof. The horrifying words hung suspended in the tense air between them like thick, toxic smoke. David's logical brain rejected the statement automatically. Kristen, his lawful wife, the mother of his only child. She was incredibly cold, yes. She was emotionally distant, definitely. But cold-blooded murder. That's completely insane, David stated, but his trembling voice sounded weak and hollow, even to his own ears. 4 years ago, I miraculously started getting better, Julian explained rapidly, his eyes constantly darting to watch the pursuing van in the side mirror. My legs just started working again out of nowhere. The specialists called it a rare medical miracle, a spontaneous neurological recovery. But Mom got really upset. I mean, she was furious, Dad. She immediately increased all my heavy medications, and I instantly started getting worse again. I was constantly dizzy, incredibly weak, fading away. I couldn't figure it out until I secretly pretended to swallow my pills one afternoon and hid them under my tongue instead. David violently swerved the massive around a much slower sedan, his shocked mind reeling from the overload of information. You're actually saying your own mother was purposefully poisoning you? Yes, to intentionally keep me paralyzed and trapped. And she has been slowly poisoning you too, Dad. Every single morning in your black coffee. Haven't you noticed how impossibly tired you've been for years? How foggy your brain always feels? He had, God help him, he truly had. He had this deep, bone-weary exhaustion that absolutely never went away, no matter how much he slept. The terrifying way his daily thoughts sometimes seemed to slowly move through thick molasses. He had always naively blamed it on work stress, getting older, and the immense emotional burden of being a full-time caregiver. I have been secretly watching her every move for 4 entire years, Julian continued, his voice steadying slightly. Playing the paralyzed victim so she wouldn't ever know I had figured out her sick game. I've been carefully collecting hard evidence, hidden audio recordings, her toxic pills and yours that I managed to secretly swap out and hide, financial documents. Dad, she has actually done this before. What? Her very first husband, Peter Castile. He tragically died in a horrific house fire exactly 7 years ago, right before she suddenly met and married you. His massive life insurance policy paid out almost $1 million. Julian's voice was violently shaking now. I secretly found absolutely everything. She is actively planning the exact same terrible fate for us. That is the real reason why she went on this sudden girls' trip. Those masked men back there in that van. They are going to carefully make it look like a tragic electrical fire. Tonight, we were supposed to be deeply asleep in our beds. We were supposed to be dead. David's hands were trembling so violently, he nearly lost physical control of the steering wheel. He forcefully made himself take a deep breath to laser focus on the road ahead. The sprawling, rusty storage facility was rapidly coming up on the right-hand side. You have had actual proof for 4 years, and you never once told me. I was terrified. Julian's voice finally broke into a sob. I was only 8 years old when I first figured it out. Who on earth would ever believe me? And she watches you like a hawk all the time. I simply couldn't risk trying to tell you when she might be secretly listening. I had to patiently wait until she physically left the state. I had to meticulously plan. David abruptly pulled the SUV into the gated storage facility, frantically using the gate code Julian recited flawlessly from memory. The dark van followed them inside but kept a cautious distance. Now hypervigilant, David rapidly navigated the confusing maze of bright orange metal doors until Julian frantically pointed at unit number 247. He slammed the car into park, and they both jumped out into the cool air. Julian was already rapidly punching in a complex code on the electronic keypad. The heavy metal door rolled up to reveal a sight that literally stopped David's beating heart. The entire large unit was a high-tech command center. There were multiple glowing laptops, security cameras, stacked filing boxes, and a massive corkboard wall completely covered in printed photographs, financial documents, and red string connecting them all like something ripped straight out of a Hollywood crime thriller. And right in the dead center was a large photograph of a man David didn't recognize. He was in his mid-30s, handsome and smiling warmly at the camera. Peter Castile, Julian said very quietly. Mom's very first victim. Dad, I have been painstakingly building the legal case against her for 4 solid years. Absolutely everything we need to completely destroy her is right here in this room. David stared blankly at his 12-year-old son, this absolute stranger who had dedicated a third of his young life to pretending to be a paralyzed invalid, playing an incredibly dangerous long game of cat and mouse against his own mother. He suddenly realized he had absolutely no real idea who Julian truly was anymore, or what his brilliant son was actually capable of. Outside the metal walls, he could hear the dark van's heavy engine idling loudly. They were waiting. The storage unit was fully climate-controlled, which perfectly explained how Julian's expensive electronic equipment had miraculously survived for however long he had been sneaking away to this place. David rapidly counted 4 high-end laptops, 2 modern tablets, and enough external hard drives to fully stock a small electronics boutique. The massive wall of physical evidence looked exactly like something assembled for a massive federal racketeering investigation. "How did you even manage to do all of this?" David asked, still desperately trying to wrap his overwhelmed mind around the sheer scale of it. Julian quickly pulled down the heavy rolling metal door, locking it, and sealing them safely inside the bunker. "I had some help, sort of." He briskly moved to one of the glowing laptops and clicked it open. "After I initially figured out exactly what Mom was doing to me, I knew I had to be incredibly smart about it. I started with the absolute basics, pretending to be deeply asleep whenever she assumed I was fully knocked out from the heavy medication. I heard horrible things, private phone calls. I heard her talking late at night to Grandma Margaret." "Your grandmother actually knows about this?" "Knows about it." Julian's laugh was sharp, cynical, and far too bitter coming from someone so incredibly young. "She is the grand mastermind who originally planned it. This is the official family business, Dad." He swiftly pulled up a digital file, and David suddenly found himself staring at a complex family tree. The Kavanaugh family, but it wasn't a normal genealogical tree. Right next to several of the men's names were specific dates, massive dollar amounts, and the chilling word deceased stamped in red. 3 entire generations, Julian explained softly, pointing at the screen. The Kavanaugh women intentionally marry men with substantial wealth or incredibly good life insurance policies. They slowly and methodically poison them over time, intentionally make them weak and dependent, and then they expertly stage tragic accidents. Massive house fires mostly, but Aunt Deb's second husband supposedly drowned in a lake. Cousin Tracy's wealthy husband had a terrible, fatal car accident. He rapidly clicked through several grim files. "I have thoroughly documented 17 exact cases spanning over 30 years. David felt violently sick to his stomach. He had personally met Margaret Kavanaugh dozens of times. She was the sweet, elderly grandmother who always baked fresh cookies for family holiday gatherings. The woman who had generously helped with Julian's care after the terrible accident. The woman who had been inside their private home countless times with completely unrestricted access to absolutely everything. "This secure storage unit," David said, gesturing to the room. "How on earth did you rent it? You are barely 12 years old." "I didn't rent it. Peter Castile did." Julian quickly pulled up another scanned document. Right before he tragically died, he secretly rented this exact unit under a fake company name. I accidentally found the hidden spare key tucked inside a dusty box of Mom's old things that she arrogantly thought she had perfectly hidden. There was a desperate letter locked inside here. He absolutely knew something was terribly wrong with him. He was actively documenting her crimes too, but he just didn't figure it out in time to save himself. Julian walked over, opened a small, heavy metal lockbox, and carefully pulled out a fragile, hand-written letter. Looking at it, David instantly recognized the controlled, absolute panic reflected in the messy, shaky handwriting. "If you are reading this letter, I am probably already dead. Kristen is absolutely not who she seems to be. I have been violently sick for several months now. My doctors can't figure out what is wrong with my body. She fiercely insists on personally handling all my food and medication. I have recently started to heavily suspect. The tragic letter abruptly ended right there, forever unfinished. David vividly imagined poor Peter Castile sitting alone in this very same storage unit, sweating and sick, racing desperately against the clock to document his dark suspicions before whatever toxic poison Kristen was feeding him took its final, lethal effect. He had tragically lost that race. I have been secretly adding to his original research, Julian stated firmly. Whenever Mom arrogantly thought I was fast asleep, I was actually wide awake, watching her, listening to her, recording her every word. She and Grandma Margaret would occasionally talk right inside my dark bedroom, foolishly assuming I was completely unconscious from the heavy liquid medication. They openly discussed their wicked plans, the exact timeline of our deaths, and the massive insurance money they would get. David paced the small, cramped space, desperately trying to organize his wildly spiraling thoughts. The two masked men waiting outside in that van right now. Victor Hughes and Richard Vance. They are dangerous fixers who work directly for Grandma Margaret. They have successfully done this horrible thing before. They stage the fatal accidents and expertly make them look perfectly natural. Tonight was supposed to finally be our tragic turn. Julian's voice hardened into steel. But I have been getting ready for them. I secretly swapped out the data SIM cards and rerouted the security cameras around our entire house over 3 months ago. Absolutely everything that happens inside our home tonight will securely record to a remote, encrypted cloud server they know absolutely nothing about. David finally stopped pacing and really, truly looked at his incredible son. Julian stood much straighter and taller than David ever remembered from 6 years ago. His shoulders were pulled back confidently, his jaw firmly set. There was unbreakable, cold steel gleaming in those gray eyes. Whatever unimaginable horrors the last 4 years of living a constant lie had done to him, watching his own mother actively plot his brutal murder, it had forged something entirely unbreakable inside the boy's soul. "We urgently need to call the police right now," David declared. "No," Julian's sharp response was immediate. "Not yet, Dad. We simply don't have enough hard proof. Everything I have gathered so far is entirely circumstantial. Audio recordings made by a child could be easily dismissed in court. The physical evidence about Peter Castile's tragic death is 7 years old. A high-priced defense lawyer would rip it to shreds." He gestured widely to the massive evidence wall. "We need much more. We need them to actually attempt to commit the crime on camera. Then we will finally have them trapped." "Are you completely insane?" David's voice rose in panic. "You want to actually let them burn down our family house with us supposedly trapped inside it?" "They already firmly believe we are going to be inside." Julian swiftly moved to another laptop and pulled up a live video feed. It clearly showed the interior of their Seattle house from multiple hidden angles. David instantly recognized their pristine living room, the modern kitchen, and Julian's bedroom featuring the empty, horrible hospital bed. "I secretly installed tiny, hidden cameras everywhere. We are going to safely watch them do it from here, fully document everything. And then," he pulled up another bright screen showing several drafted emails and large video files perfectly queued up. "Then we are going to destroy them completely." A sudden, sharp knock on the rolling metal storage unit door made both of them jump out of their skin. It wasn't overly loud. It was almost polite. Then, a man's voice called out, slightly muffled by the metal but very clear. "Mr. Hayes, Julian, we know you two are hiding in there. Let's just open the door and talk about this like reasonable, civilized people." David instantly recognized that smooth voice from somewhere deep in his past. Where had he heard it? The funeral. Peter Castile's funeral. Kristen had dragged him to it 7 years ago when they had just started heavily dating. She had politely introduced him to several people from her past life. One of them had been the owner of this exact voice. Julian quickly pulled up a digital photograph on his laptop screen. It showed a man in his late 50s with neat graying hair and a friendly, disarming smile. The exact kind of trustworthy face you'd never suspect of murder. Victor Hughes, Julian whispered darkly. Grandma Margaret's current boyfriend. He has personally murdered at least 5 innocent people that I can definitively prove. We genuinely just want to talk to you, Victor's voice continued smoothly through the door. There has been a massive misunderstanding here. Your lovely mother is incredibly worried about you, Julian. She specifically asked us to come check on you both when you sadly didn't answer your cell phone. David looked at his son, who was aggressively shaking his head in disgust. He is lying through his teeth. Mom has been texting with both of them all morning long. I secretly saw the deleted messages on her iPad right before she left. He quickly pulled up the saved screenshots. Sure enough, there were chilling texts between Kristen and Victor. They will both be heavily asleep by 10 p.m. Make it look perfectly electrical. I want it completely done before midnight. Understood. Richard has the strong accelerant. We will make it very quick. Good. I absolutely cannot do another 6 years of this nightmare. The crippled kid creeps me out. David felt something vital and warm completely crack and shatter inside his chest. The crippled kid. His wonderful son. Her own flesh and blood. She had callously referred to him like he was a gross inconvenience, exactly like they both were. Mr. Hayes, Victor called out again, sounding concerned. David, listen to me. I know exactly what Julian has been telling you. He is a very sick, confused boy. The heavy medical prescriptions severely affect his fragile mind. We are simply here to safely help him. Julian silently pulled out his smartphone and showed David a saved video file. It was securely time-stamped from exactly 3 months ago. The grainy, green night vision footage from a hidden bedroom camera showed Kristen creeping into Julian's dark room late at night. She held a large medical syringe. David watched, his absolute horror mounting, as she callously injected something directly into Julian's IV line, the exact line she always insisted he desperately needed for his nighttime nutrition. Liquid diazepam, Julian whispered, his voice trembling. HTLY. More than enough to keep a grown man heavily sedated for 12 hours. I have been secretly swapping my IV bags for months, carefully filling them with simple saline water, letting her arrogantly think her poison was working. The heavy metal door of the storage unit suddenly shuddered violently with a massive bang. They were forcefully trying to pry it open with tools. We have to go, David commanded in a panicked whisper. Right now. Is there any other way out of this box? Julian was already rapidly moving, pulling a heavy tactical backpack from behind the tall filing boxes. I meticulously planned for this exact scenario. There is a large ventilation shaft hidden in the back corner. It directly connects to the adjacent unit, which I also secretly rented under a fake company name. We can crawl out through there and get to the getaway car I have parked 2 rows over. You have a getaway car. It's Peter Castle's old gray Honda Civic. I found the spare keys and the vehicle title inside this storage unit. I've been secretly keeping the engine maintained. Julian was already rapidly unscrewing the large metal vent cover with a practiced, terrifying efficiency. I have had 4 long years to sit in a wheelchair and plan for absolutely every single possibility, Dad. Please just trust me. The metal door violently shuddered again, much harder this time. The metal hinges groaned loudly. They had maybe 1 short minute before it completely gave way. David hastily grabbed the heavy backpack his son shoved toward him, watching in absolute awe as Julian quickly gathered very specific laptops and encrypted hard drives with the cold precision of a trained spy who had mentally rehearsed this escape 1,000 times. His 12-year-old boy, his precious baby, who had been forced to live an unspeakable nightmare for a third of his life, playing a deadly game of espionage against his own psychopathic mother. Go, Julian ordered, gesturing sharply to the dark, open vent. I will be right behind you. David hesitated for a second. Julian, I know, Dad, I know this is totally insane, but we are absolutely going to make them legally pay for everything they did, to poor Peter, to us, to every single victim. His young voice was ice cold. It sounded completely adult, nothing at all like a frightened child's. Now move. David quickly dropped down and crawled into the dusty ventilation shaft, the cold sheet metal pressing uncomfortably against his scraped hands and knees. Right behind him, he heard Julian rapidly following. Then came the terrifying, loud screech of the storage unit door finally giving way, snapping off its tracks. Angry shouts erupted, followed by heavy, frantic footsteps entering the room, but David and Julian were already completely gone, moving silently through the pitch darkness toward whatever dangerous phase came next. The old Honda Civic that Peter Castile had driven 7 years ago was faded gray and featured a massive, ugly dent in the passenger door. Miraculously, the engine turned over and started on the very first try, which David gratefully took as either a phenomenally good omen or absolute proof that his brilliant son had indeed been meticulously maintaining the vehicle in secret. They swiftly pulled out of the massive storage facility's unguarded back exit, while Victor Hughes and his violent partner were still furiously tearing the empty unit apart. David drove aimlessly through the city streets at first, entirely focused on putting as much physical distance between them and the immediate danger as possible. His shocked mind absolutely wouldn't stop racing. Every single fundamental assumption he had built his entire adult life upon for the past 6 years was currently burning to the ground. Kristen's supposed love, his entire marriage, Julian's tragic paralysis, all of it was vicious lies, all of it a deeply calculated, evil scheme. "Where exactly are we going?" he finally managed to ask, his voice raspy. Julian already had 3 separate laptops open on his small lap, his fingers flying across the glowing keyboards at lightning speed. "The old Motel 6 out on Highway 99. I securely booked a corner room 3 days ago under Peter Castile's name. I paid in hard cash. They will absolutely never think to look for us out there." "Julian, you are 12 years old. How on earth did you manage to book a motel room?" "I look a lot older when I wear the right oversized clothes, wear a hat, and speak with deep confidence. Most people only ever see exactly what they expect to see." Julian didn't even bother to look up from his scrolling screens. "I have secretly been out of the house dozens of times over the last 4 years. Mom always arrogantly thought I was totally paralyzed and heavily sedated. I'd patiently wait until she was dead asleep, then I'd slip out the window for a few hours. I used public library computers, dark coffee shops with free Wi-Fi, relentlessly building this legal ca. See?" David's burned hands tightened agonizingly on the steering wheel. His son, his brilliant, deeply traumatized, terrifying son. "Julian, you are just a kid. You shouldn't have ever had to do any of this." "But I absolutely did." Now Julian finally looked over at him, and David could clearly see the crushing, massive weight his young son carried, the sheer, suffocating loneliness of his secret mission. "Because if I didn't do it, Dad, we would both be dead and buried." The horrific, undeniable truth of it settled heavily over them both like falling volcanic ash. David desperately wanted to argue with him, to boldly claim that he would have eventually protected them, that he would have naturally figured out the evil plot. But the sad truth was, he hadn't. He had been far too endlessly tired, far too mentally foggy, far too caught up in the soul-crushing grind of massive medical bills and endless insurance claims, and desperately trying to hold together a toxic marriage that was already rotting from the inside. The daily poison mixed into his morning coffee, every single day for 6 long years. How much permanent neurological damage had it done to him? "What exactly was she secretly giving me?" David asked quietly, almost afraid to hear the answer. Julian clicked and pulled up a detailed spreadsheet file. She started out with heavy benzodiazepines, various Valium derivatives, just enough to keep you completely compliant, always tired, easy to manipulate and control. Then, over the last 2 years, she maliciously added small, steady doses of lithium. It severely affects your cognitive function when you don't actually have bipolar disorder. It makes you incredibly foggy, constantly uncertain of your own memory, much easier to severely gaslight. David vividly remembered the countless vicious arguments, the specific times Kristen had aggressively told him he was remembering major events entirely wrong, that he was just confused and stressed out, that his personal version of reality didn't make any logical sense. He had slowly started to deeply doubt himself, his own mind, his own sanity. How did you even manage to figure all this medical stuff out? Google searches at first, and then I stole advanced medical textbooks from the downtown library. I'd secretly photographed the complex pages with my phone. Mom originally got me the smartphone so I could urgently call for help if I ever needed it in my wheelchair, but she arrogantly never thought I'd actually use it for advanced toxicology research. Julian rapidly clicked through more bright screens. I meticulously documented absolutely everything. Every single pill she ever forced me to take, every single physical symptom I felt. I carefully cross-referenced them with massive online toxicology databases. Then I bravely started physically testing it on myself, swallowing some specific pills, hiding others under my tongue, rigorously noting how my body reacted, building an undeniable scientific pattern. Jesus Christ, Julian, that was incredibly dangerous. You could have easily died. It was far less dangerous than just quietly letting her eventually kill me. His son's voice was suddenly very sharp and defensive. I did exactly what I absolutely had to do, and I got really smart about it. I secretly started connecting with anonymous online communities, secure medical forums, and hardcore true crime investigative groups. I eventually found a few other people who had tragically been through somewhat similar poisoning situations. They patiently helped me understand exactly what I was looking at. The neon sign for the Highway 99 Motel 6 finally appeared on the right side of the dark road. It was a dingy, run-down, 2-story concrete building that probably mostly rented its stained rooms by the hour. It was the absolute perfect place for disappearing completely off the grid. David parked the dented Honda in the shadowy back lot, and they quickly grabbed their heavy bags. The room Julian had prepaid for was located on the second floor. It was a secluded corner unit featuring a bleak view of the empty asphalt parking lot. Inside, the stagnant air smelled heavily of stale cigarette smoke and cheap industrial floor cleaner. There were 2 lumpy double beds, a cheap TV permanently bolted to the scratch dresser, and faded curtains that had certainly seen much better decades. But for right now, it was a safe fortress. Julian immediately began setting up his multiple laptops on the small, wobbly circular table, rapidly creating a sophisticated digital command center. David stood back and watched him work. This incredible stranger who simply looked like his son, the fluid efficiency of his movements, the intense, unbreakable focus. Where exactly had the innocent child gone? When had Julian officially stopped being a little kid? "For years," David said out loud into the quiet room, "you have been brilliantly playing this incredibly difficult role for 4 entire years. Pretending every day to be paralyzed." "It was totally necessary," Julian stated flatly, plugging in a massive external hard drive. "But it was also really horrible. I won't lie to you, Dad. There were so many times I desperately wanted to just break down and tell you everything. Times I almost cracked under the pressure. But I simply couldn't risk our lives. If Mom ever suspected for even a single second that I knew the truth, she would have instantly accelerated the murder timeline. We would be dead." David sat down heavily on the edge of the lumpy bed, suddenly feeling utterly exhausted to his core. The initial massive spike of adrenaline was rapidly fading away, leaving behind the crushing, suffocating weight of their new, horrifying reality. "Your childhood. I can't. I can never get those years back for you, Julian. I know. Julian's voice softened slightly, a hint of the young boy peeking through. But I'm alive right now. We are both alive, and we are absolutely going to make sure they all pay for what they did. The local police won't be enough to handle this. Julian turned his chair to face his father fully. I've obsessively thought about this exact problem for 4 years, Dad. I've analyzed every single legal angle. If we just run to the regular police right now, what do we actually have? Some hidden audio recordings that a judge could easily dismiss as inadmissible hearsay. Evidence about Peter Castill's tragic death that the coroner officially ruled an accident 7 years ago. A few pills I stole that could be easily explained away by a good defense team. And Grandma Margaret has deep, powerful connections in this city. Her older brother is a sitting state judge. Her nephew is a high-ranking prosecutor. The Kavanaughs have been successfully doing this for 30 years because they expertly know exactly how to make the evidence completely disappear. David's stomach churned violently with fresh anxiety. So what exactly are you proposing we do? I'm saying we need absolutely ironclad, undeniable proof, crystal clear video evidence of them actively committing a major federal crime, signed confessions, untraceable financial records. We need to expertly build a legal case so completely airtight that all their corrupt connections won't matter at all. Julian rapidly pulled up the live security feed from their Seattle house. And tonight, we are finally going to get it. The bright laptop screen showed multiple high-definition angles of their dark, empty home. The pristine living room, the spotless kitchen, the long hallway, and Julian's bedroom featuring the empty hospital bed. Everything looked perfectly normal, quiet, and completely still, waiting for destruction. They genuinely think we are asleep in there right now, Julian said coldly. Heavily sedated and totally helpless. They are going to come back there tonight to finish the job, and we are going to record absolutely all of it in high definition. And then what? David asked nervously. They burn down our expensive house. We show the tape to the police and just pray it's enough. No, then we go much deeper. Julian confidently opened another encrypted file. This one showed complex financial records, offshore bank accounts, massive wire transfers, and dozens of life insurance policies. While they are actively committing felony arson tonight, I am going to be busy digitally hacking into Grandma Margaret's private, encrypted personal server. She arrogantly keeps absolutely everything stored digitally now. All the detailed records of their murder operations, the real names, the dates, the specific poisoning methods. It is all sitting right there. I have been tirelessly working on breaking through her massive firewalls for 8 solid months. Tonight, while they are totally distracted, while they arrogantly think they've finally won, I am going to digitally steal absolutely everything. David stared at his son in utter disbelief. You actually taught yourself how to hack. YouTube video tutorials, hidden dark web online forums, and a lot of trial and error practice. Julian shrugged his small shoulders like it was absolutely nothing. Like 12-year-olds regularly learn to hack massive criminal syndicates every single day. I'm pretty good at it now. I'm not a genius level or anything, but I'm good enough for this. Grandma Margaret's digital security is very strong, but she made one massive, fatal mistake. She trusted an IT company that had a massive data breach 6 months ago. I managed to buy the admin credentials off the dark web. I've been incredibly patient, waiting in the shadows for the absolute perfect moment to strike. The perfect moment being right when they think we're both burning to death in our beds. Exactly. Julian's smile was terrifyingly cold. They will be celebrating their victory. They will be sloppy. That is exactly when I strike. David abruptly stood up and paced the small, smelly motel room. Absolutal. Why everything in his paternal soul screamed that this was incredibly wrong, that they should just immediately run to the nearest police precinct, that a 12-year-old boy shouldn't be masterminding a complex counterespionage operation against his homicidal family members. But another, darker part of him, the deeply wounded part that had been slowly poisoned for 6 years, that had helplessly watched his only son suffer, that had been played for an absolute fool, that angry part desperately wanted blood. "Walk me through it again," David said finally, his voice hard. "The entire master plan, every single detail." Julian nodded professionally and pulled up a detailed digital timeline. "Tonight, exactly between 10:00 p.m. and midnight, Victor Hughes and Richard Vance will illegally enter our house. They will simply use Kristen's spare key. She secretly gave them a copy. They will expertly set up an electrical fire, most likely down in the basement. They will make it look exactly like faulty old wiring. The massive house will burn incredibly fast. They've been meticulously planning this for months." "What? How can you possibly know all this for sure?" "Mom's iPad. She lazily syncs it with her private cell phone and doesn't realize I can easily access both devices through her unsecure cloud account. I've read every single text, every hidden email. I know the entire master plan." He clicked through dozens of saved screenshots. "While the house is actively burning to the ground, I'll be sitting safely right here, breaking into Grandma Margaret's secure server. I will download absolutely everything. 30 years of hard evidence. Names of all the victims, complex financial records, communication between all the family members, everything. And even if the massive hack somehow fails, we still have the felony arson completely captured on video from multiple angles. That alone is more than enough to legally start a massive federal investigation. But with Margaret's digital files, we can bring down the entire evil operation at once. Every single Kavanaugh involved goes to prison. Every single victim finally gets justice." David looked at the massive digital evidence wall Julian had carefully recreated on his multiple laptop screens. Peter Castill's smiling face staring back at them. Other innocent men. 17 of them, Julian had said earlier. 17 loving husbands. 17 brutal murders perfectly disguised as tragic accidents. "Tell me more about Peter," David said quietly, sitting back down. Julian pulled up a specific folder. Inside were dozens of photos, financial documents, and even raw video files. He was a brilliant software engineer. He briefly met Mom at a big tech conference in Portland. It was a whirlwind, passionate romance. They married in just 6 months. He had a massive corporate life insurance policy worth over $800,000 through his tech company. Julian's voice was entirely clinical, completely detached. He suddenly started getting sick just 8 months into the marriage. Severe chronic fatigue, random muscle weakness, intense mental confusion. The top doctors couldn't find a single thing biologically wrong with him. Sound incredibly familiar? It did, far too familiar. He finally figured it out about 2 weeks before he tragically died. He secretly rented that storage unit. He started aggressively documenting everything. But he simply ran out of time. Julian pulled up some old security footage. It was grainy from 7 years ago. It clearly showed a large suburban house David didn't recognize. Night vision footage, and then suddenly explosive flames. An electrical fire. The official fire investigation simply stated Peter was tragically found dead in his master bedroom. Severe smoke inhalation. The insurance company eagerly paid out. Mom played the devastatingly grieving widow. She immediately moved to Seattle just 6 months later and accidentally bumped into you. David felt hot bile rapidly rise in his throat. "I was always going to be next." "You were definitely next, but she unexpectedly got pregnant with me, and I strongly think that severely complicated things for her. She actually seemed genuinely happy for a short while when I was a tiny baby. I've closely analyzed the old pictures. She genuinely smiled differently back then." Julian's face tightened with pain. "But then I started growing up. I started being an actual person instead of just a cute prop. I started asking too many questions." I firmly believe that's exactly when she decided we both had to go. The terrible accident at the lake house wasn't a tragic accident at all. I remember it vividly. I was only 6, but I remember it. She forcefully pushed me off that high wooden dock. She tearfully told everyone I just slipped on a wet board, but I clearly remember her hard hands violently shoving my back. The sheer physical force of it. Julian's small hands were violently shaking now. I hit my head incredibly hard on the wooden dock support, and I nearly drowned in the cold water. The doctors said the initial trauma caused the severe paralysis, but it really didn't. The real paralysis came much later, from the toxic medications she started secretly feeding me while I was recovering in the hospital. David slowly moved to his brave son's side and gently put a warm hand on his tense shoulder. Julian instantly flinched at first, unaccustomed to the contact, but then slowly relaxed into the comforting touch. How long had it truly been since David had really, affectionately touched him? The massive hospital bed had created an artificial physical distance, the bulky wheelchair, the constant hovering monitoring. Kristen had aggressively controlled all physical contact, all daily care. "I am so incredibly sorry," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have seen right through her. I should have fiercely protected you." "You were being heavily poisoned too, Dad. She meticulously made sure of that." Julian slowly looked up at him, and David saw hot tears threatening to spill. "I absolutely do not blame you, Dad. I only blame her. I blame all of them, and I am going to make them heavily pay for it." The fiery determination shining in those young gray eyes was incredibly fierce, entirely unshakable. David instantly recognized it because he felt it too, burning brightly in his chest where his broken heart used to be. "Okay," David said with absolute finality. "We do this your way, but I have strict conditions." "What specific conditions?" "You stay right here in this room. You flawlessly run the technical side of the operation, the hacking, the remote recordings, coordinating everything. But if anything at all goes wrong, if they somehow figure out we are not asleep in that house, I am the one who violently deals with them, not you. You have already tragically sacrificed 4 years of your childhood to this nightmare. You do not sacrifice a single thing else." Julian immediately started to protest, but David cut him off firmly. "I truly mean it, Julian. You have been forced to be the adult in the room for far too long. Let me finally be your father. Let me actually protect you, even if it is 4 years too late." Something tight in Julian's stoic expression finally crumbled. The rigid adult facade slipped away, and for a brief, heartbreaking moment, David saw the terrified, lonely kid underneath. The small child who had been entirely alone in this terrifying, deadly fight for so incredibly long. "Okay," Julian whispered softly, wiping a tear. "Okay, Dad." They spent the next few tense hours meticulously preparing. Julian carefully walked David through every single computer system, every live camera feed, every possible contingency plan. The brilliant kid had thought of absolutely everything. There was backup battery power for all the remote recordings, multiple redundant servers, and automated emergency contacts who would instantly receive all the damning evidence if something went terribly wrong. "Who exactly are these emergency contacts?" David asked, looking at the long digital list. "Famous true crime podcasters, aggressive investigative journalists, people who will actually dig deep if we suddenly disappear." Julian pulled up their public profiles. "I've been slowly building online relationships with them for over 2 years. They currently think I'm a 25-year-old independent researcher deeply interested in cold cases. If we don't personally check in by noon tomorrow, they all automatically receive massive, encrypted packets of our hard evidence." David slowly shook his head in sheer amazement. "You really have meticulously thought of absolutely everything." "I had to, Dad. It was the only way I could survive." At 8:00 p.m., they ordered a greasy pizza from a cheap place 3 dark blocks away. David went to quickly pick it up, wearing a pulled-down baseball cap and keeping his face hidden. The intense paranoia was entirely new but absolutely necessary. He kept terrifyingly expecting to suddenly see Kristen or Victor or someone from the evil Kavanaugh family, but the city streets were perfectly normal. Regular people going about their mundane lives. totally unaware that a 12-year-old disabled child had been quietly waging a secret, deadly war against a family of serial killers. Back at the smelly motel, they ate the hot pizza in heavy silence, intensely watching the live feeds from their empty house. Everything remained perfectly still, silently waiting. At exactly 9:30 p.m., Julian's central laptop pinged loudly. A text message sent to Kristen's phone, which Julian was actively monitoring. Richard has absolutely everything. 10:45 p.m. entry. Kristen's cold response came back incredibly quickly. Make it totally clean. I want to be able to come home to nothing but ashes. David felt his absolute last, tiny shred of doubt instantly evaporate into thin air. This was incredibly real. His own wife desperately wanted him dead. She wanted their only son D.'d. She had been meticulously planning their fiery murders for months, maybe even years. "It's finally time," Julian said, taking a deep breath. He started rapidly typing, his nimble fingers flying across multiple glowing keyboards. Dozens of dark windows opened and closed on the various screens. Complex green code scrolled rapidly past. "I am officially initiating the massive hack on Grandma Margaret's private server. It will take exactly about an hour to fully crack through her firewalls, then another hour to download everything. That gives them exactly enough time to commit the arson, time to get arrogant and sloppy." David nervously watched the digital clock. 10:00 p.m., 10:15 p.m., 10:30 p.m. At exactly 10:43 p.m., the exterior security cameras caught sudden movement. A dark utility van slowly pulled into their wide driveway with its headlights completely turned off. Two dark figures quickly emerged. Victor Hughes and the other man, Richard Vance, David assumed. They moved swiftly with practiced, terrifying efficiency toward the dark house. "They are casually using Kristen's spare key," Julian narrated coldly, digitally zooming in on the front porch camera. "They are entering directly through the front door. See how they are carefully carrying those heavy duffel bags? That's the liquid accelerant and the electronic ignition devices." David watched in horror as his beautiful home was violently invaded. These masked men casually walked right through his pristine living room, his modern kitchen, down the hallway where Julian had once taken his very first baby steps. They were incredibly casual about it, experienced killers. "Basement access," Julian continued his narration. The interior camera showed the two men opening the heavy basement door. "They will expertly set up multiple ignition points. They will meticulously make it look exactly like an overloaded electrical circuit. The hot fire will rapidly spread straight up through the walls, immediately cutting off all upstairs exit routes. We would have simply died in our sleep, never even knowing what hit us." On the glowing screen, Victor Hughes was actively setting up small, sinister devices near the main electrical panels, right behind the large water heater, and along the dry wooden support beams. David recognized the crude items from action movies. Incendiary devices equipped with digital timers. "How much time do we actually have?" David asked nervously. "They will likely set the digital timers for exactly midnight. It gives them plenty of time to get completely clear of the neighborhood and establish rock-solid alibis. By the time the local fire department eventually arrives, the entire house will be fully involved in flames." Julian's voice was steady, utterly clinical. "We have exactly 90 minutes. The bright hacking progress bar on another laptop screen showed 47% complete. "What if they somehow figure out we're not sleeping up there?" David asked, sweating. "What if they decide to quickly check the bedrooms?" "They won't bother," Julian replied smoothly. "Mom officially confirmed we'd be heavily sedated. They completely trust her inside intel." Julian pulled up more saved texts.